E3 though, out of all three of the papers, is the one with the most content, the most reading, and the most theory, right? But if we do it well, the nice thing about it is that if we get through it effectively, you'll only ever need to go through everything once. You know, you wouldn't need to go back and study it over and over and over. It's one of those that once you get it, if you understand the principle well, likelihood of you needing to go and revisit it is extremely slim. And because you also have, you know, a lot of these other activities in the background that you're doing, it will definitely help you understand it a lot better and a lot quicker as well. Right. Other than that, let's jump right in. All right, so looking at, I think you sort of see this trend if you look at a lot of the strategic paper subjects. But if you were to look at E3 in the context of the objective test as an example, what you'll find is, from a weighting perspective, it's intentionally been designed in such a way that almost every part of it is equally weighted. So it's important. So it's impossible to say this bit is more important than another. You know, it's got a lot of content, it's got a lot of theory, but at the same time, you can't spot and say these are the important bits, these are not the important bits. If you were studying for the objective test, you'd have to know the book literally start to finish. There's nothing that's not examinable in that course book, right? And because of that and how it's split, this basically speaks around that, to say we need to know every single bit, and every bit is important. Also important is when you look at the content areas, and I think this is quite important when you think of a case study as well, to say when the syllabus changed in 2019, content area B got brought in, as well as content area F. So organizational ecosystems, there's a lot of stuff that's in there that's entirely new. Digital strategies, an entirely new 2 chapters as well. So because they've been updated and those specific focus in making sure that those are more relevant to what's happening now, it just follows that it's important that we know those extremely well. With the others, you could easily rely on previous knowledge. If you've done CIMA before, what was previously in E3, if you've done anything around strategic management, the principles of the others you might find a bit familiar. But with ecosystems and digital strategy, those you might find are completely new concepts. And what's also important is to ensure that even though we understand them, we must understand them in the context of how CIMA presents them and how they're going to ask us about them. And that's really the core of what we want to do. So you'll see as we go through the respective weeks and we go through the chapters, you'll see that when we get to the chapters around ecosystems, we give some specific focus to it. You might see us spend a bit more time on them. You might see me go into a bit more detail and want to make sure that we understand all the terminology, what it all means, a lot more than some of the others, which are easier to just understand. Similar with digital strategy, but digital strategy, you'll find for the most part, you'll probably understand it quite well. And very importantly, it's how do we link the case study to E3, right? And I think we know that this is really what we're preparing for more than anything, to make sure that we can pass the case study. In the case study itself, the underlying assumption is that, you know, you've passed E3, F3, P3, and you're basically competent in them. You have demonstrated that you understand the technical ability or the technical concepts. So one of the important things always to remember that in the case study, you're now basically expected to apply all of this knowledge and show that you can use everything that you know in order to solve a real world business problem and help advise on strategy or what we must do in response to something that has happened, right? Important around this, and here they put all the bullet points, is that they tell you that the strategic level case study has 19 assessment outcomes, and each of these can be mapped back to knowledge you'll have gained in studying for the strategic level exams, right? Things like strategic options, which we're going to cover, strategic decisions, acquisition and divestment opportunities. You'll see we'd have touched on some of it in F3. There's a piece of it we're going to touch on in E3 as well, right? Responses to opportunities and threats, suitable analytical tools, stakeholder needs and how we manage stakeholders, how we respond to changes in the ecosystem, KPIs, understanding risk, understanding our sources of finance, dividend policy, business valuation, once again, ties on risk, ethical dilemma or ethics in general, cyber risks, internal controls, audit resources, as well as governance. And you'll see that out of those 19 bullet points, you can almost start to map them to say, this K falls under F, this falls under P, this falls under E. But what you'll find is that as we go through E3, parts of it will feel like you're not doing the theoretical side of what you might have covered in F or P. That's because for the most part, if I was to give you an example, if you were asked a question to say, we've got a few strategic options we're thinking of investing in, and they put in front of you, and they ask, which one should we go for? For you to work out your ROI, NPV, all of that is an F3 skill. That's your understanding the numbers. That's your understanding that in order for it to make financial sense, this is what I need to be able to do, and these are the tools that I use in order to answer that question. But once you've done that, and they ask you, well, aside from the financial factors, what are the non-financial factors I need to consider to know whether I should go for this investment or not? Then you start bringing in a lot of E3. A lot of the time, you'll find that with a lot of the questions you have, even though there's a technical aspect to it, for you to understand the business application, understand the context, and actually being able to apply to the context requires you to pull from E3. And you'll see that with a lot of these bullet points, when they speak about a lot of the tools, the models, etc., that we must apply, you'll see a word that comes up quite frequently, and it's appropriate. To say there's a lot of theories that we cover, there's a lot of models that we cover, but you must understand which one is appropriate for the case that's been put in front of you. And you'll see that appropriateness comes out very, very strongly in E3, and that's why it's important to know. E3 tends to make up a very, very big part of case study exams. If we're not strong in E3, we're going to have a difficult time in those exams, right? So that's why you'll see we're giving it more time. You'll see we're going through it a bit slower. But the nice thing about it is once you get it, you'll get it. It's not more difficult than it needs to be. It's actually quite straightforward. If you understand the principle and the concept, then we shouldn't have an issue. Right, any questions before we jump into the work itself? It looks like we're all good. So with chapter number one is a very, very good one because it does something that creates good context for us. What it does is it actually starts to give you a bit of an overview of everything else that we're going to dive into deeper detail on in the coming weeks, right? So to an extent, it gives you background. It almost tells you a lot of the things that you would have studied in E2 that sort of comes in as well, but then also starts to give a snapshot of everything strategy related. And you'll see that as we go through the respective weeks, it's almost like we're getting into deeper detail of everything that we've seen in this slide. All right, so this sets the tone quite well. If you understand the concepts here as a starting point, that's a very good thing. Also, it's one of the easier ones to remember because it's very, very general. It doesn't go into too much detail. Then the subsequent ones actually get into a lot more detail thereafter. So when we look at firstly, strategy, or what's a strategy? That first box gives us that first piece to say, we're basically looking at this because we want to achieve goals and we want to achieve sustainable competitive advantage, right? And a lot of things that we look at here are going to be speaking around that. When looking at those 2 bullet points, they're still in that concept or still in that backdrop to say, if we're a profit-making entity, underlying assumption is that our ultimate goal is to increase or enhance shareholder wealth, right? And to enhance shareholder wealth, there are certain goals that we put in place that we must achieve, and we want to actually have sustainable competitive advantage because that's really what makes sure we can create wealth going into the future, right? And that's why those 2 are the main bullet points. When we look at the characteristics of strategy, or let me take it a step back, what are some of the methods that you can remember that we can use in order to formulate or develop a strategy? or any strategic approaches that come to mind? Sithebe asks, 19 points, can I use it as a tool or guide? In terms of evaluating myself when I'm preparing for a case study, it only applies on E3 content. You can use it as a guide. It's the most high level one you'll find. I would say the right sort of guide you can use in order to ensure you're covering all your bases. You'll see there's something called an exam blueprint. It's available on the CIMA website. So look at the exam blueprint for the case study itself. And what it will do is it'll give you each of the, what they call I can statements that basically break down across the 3 pillars, what the minimum sort of requirements are that you need to know. It might be a little bit more comprehensive. And the thing is, I just feel with those 19 points, it's like bullet point and it's one sentence. It doesn't actually tell you what it is they want from you. The I can statements give a little bit more meat behind it so you can properly evaluate whether you know what it is they're asking about. But you can use those in conjunction with that, definitely for the case study. So when we speak about developing or formulating a strategy, what methods or approaches come to mind?